Welcome back to the Daily Living Jewish Kitzur Shulchan Aruch class. Today we begin a new section, the laws of blessings on wine. As we've already learned, wine is often used in association with a mitzvah. We get married with a cup of wine. We spoke about benching over a cup of wine. We haven't yet spoken about making kiddush over a cup of wine, and we'll discuss over here what bracha is made on wine, different types of wine, and actually at the end of the chapter we will discover that there is a second bracha that could also be made on very special wines. So we take our wine, very seriously in Judaism. Just to see where we're up to in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, we are in the section of blessings. So we're learning about a number of different types of blessings. We learned about a little bit about the brachas of Hamotzi and Bezoidus in section 48. Now we're learning about the brachas on wine in section 49. Here's a summary of what we will be looking at in chapter 49 of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So I see there's a little intro that's been added over here by the translators. I guess we can start with that. Just as, 1 minute. There we go. Just as bread has, because of its importance, been given a special bracha, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, rather than the other bracha that would be made for other grains, so has wine been honored with its own bracha, Borei Pri Hagafed, who creates fruits of the vine. This is so because wine not only satiates, but also gladdens the heart. Additionally, wine has other qualities as evidenced by the requirement that the Kiddush and Havdalah as well as Sheva Brachos are said over wine. In addition, wine was also assigned its own after bracha. There's a special bracha that we say after having a couple of wine, which is unique to wine over all other foods or drinks, that ends with Al Hagafen. This particular chapter deals with determining at what point in the process of wine preparation does it achieve the status of wine, and at what point of its deterioration does it turn into vinegar, losing the status of wine. So we'll be learning about that as well. I'm lucky that every year before Pesach, I get to make my own wine, and I don't know, I think it was 2 years ago, or was it last year? I don't remember, but we were using an old fridge. I don't know what exactly the issue was, but we checked on the wine a few days before Pesach, and it smelled terrible. So lucky for smells, because that all went straight to the garbage, and we ran straight back to purchase additional grapes and to have some fresh grape juice just in time for Pesach. This year, I just tested it on Shabbos, and so far so good. It looks like the wine is coming along. We'll be doing another batch in the next few days. I can send you pictures if you'd like. So wine is a whole art. It's a whole process. Let's learn all about it. Now, the bracha on wine, meaning the bracha that one makes before drinking wine, is Borei Pri Hagafed. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, Elokeinu, our God, Melech ha'olam, King of the entire world. Borei, who creates Pri Hagafed, the fruits of the vine. This is a special bracha we say not only in Kiddush, but anytime we drink wine. Kosher wine, of course. And after drinking wine, there's a special after blessing, which is called Al Hagafen, in the back of, or in the siddur, just after benching, the full benching, there's another smaller benching called the benching that's done over the 3 types of foods. We either say that benching after having wine, or after having bezoidus, after having grains that were not made into bread, or after having the 7 species of Israel. I actually made it as a magnet 1 year by one of our dinners. So that's a special after blessing that's recited. It has 3 different ways that it concludes. And one of the 3 ways that it concludes is a special conclusion for wine. So there's a special bracha that comes before drinking wine, and a special bracha that comes after we drink wine. Now, it makes no difference whether the wine is still bubbling or not, even if the wine is flowing on its own accord. So doesn't make a difference whether it's still fermenting or not yet fully fermented. So I could tell you about that as well, the wine process. And I mean, once wine is fully fermented, so it basically means all the natural sugar turns into alcohol. So if you don't add your own sugar, then fully fermented wine will be very bitter because, or not bitter, it won't be sweet at all. It will be very dry because all the sugar has become alcohol. And that process of the natural sugar of the grape becoming alcohol causes carbon dioxide, it causes it to bubble. So what I do is I use just pure grape juice. I don't put any sugar in at all, but I stop the fermenting process before it's done. That way it's not too bitter. So it's a bit of a mixture between grape juice and wine. It's over 40 days old, so it's halachically considered aged wine already. But by freezing the fermenting process before all the natural sugar is gone, I'm able to have a sweet drink without any sugar added. And because of that, since we bottle it before it's fully finished fermenting, so just by taking out all the dregs, that does pretty much stop it. But even when you do that and you put it through a filter, even a very fine filter, there'll always still be little pieces of the dregs that stay behind, very, very small pieces. And those pieces will still cause a little bit of fermentation to take place. And because of that, it could happen that sometimes some bottles, we open them, it comes pouring out, like when you've shaken up a gas bottle of Coke. And that's just gas that's being created from the fermentation process. So that's what he's speaking about over here. Even if it's still bubbling, meaning it hasn't fully fermented, it already is considered honorable and already has its special bracha. So perhaps in addition to learning the laws of wine, you'll also get a bit of a crash course on how to make wine, but no guarantees. No guarantees on learning it and no guarantees on the results. Even if the wine is flowing of its own accord, this probably means if you're not actually pressing the grapes, but you've just crushed the grapes. Once you crush the grapes, then the wine begins to drip out before you actually press it. This year, I came up with a new mechanism of how to squeeze the dregs. I'm talking, this is just a few weeks back, by using a pillowcase, believe it or not, a brand new white pillowcase. Because the pillowcase, it's trapped and you're able to squeeze it really, really tight. And I got 50% more wine out of the dregs than I did last year, which is a huge, huge difference because it was just squeezed a lot tighter. I'm sure with proper machinery, you'd probably double that again. But even if you haven't squeezed the dregs at all, but you just crushed them, and so the wine is beginning to drip out, that is already halachically considered honorable and deserves its own special bracha beforehand and afterwards. Even cooked wine, so most wine we buy today has been cooked, as we learned about previously when we spoke about forbidden wines and kosher wines. That's what mevushal means. It usually says it on the bottle. It has been pre-cooked, as we learned about at length. Although through the cooking process, the wine is slightly deteriorates slightly, it still is considered honorable enough to be able to use it for Kiddush, to make a special bracha beforehand, and to make a special bracha afterwards. Or konditin, that is wine into which were added honey and or spices or wormwood, which is bitter. So if you're wondering, why would you want to add wormwood, which is bitter? Well, if you know how Scotch whiskey is made, it's all about the casks. The casks are made out of different types of woods. And in fact, the casks are the wood is often gives a bitter taste. That's why they first often put other drinks into the casks before putting the whiskey in, so that the wood does not give a bitter taste. But I guess some people like that bitterness. So even if you have added spices, honey, if other ingredients have been added, it still would be considered wine, and you could say Borei Pri Hagafen. So if it's been turned into a little bit more of a treat of a drink, it doesn't lose its status of wine up until a certain point, as we will see. Even if the wine smells like vinegar, as long as it has the taste of wine, it's still considered wine as far as the bracha is concerned. So even if it smells bad, when you say smells bad, it doesn't smell off. It just smells like vinegar, which is very strong. So even if it smells that way, if it still tastes like wine, that's fine. But we go by taste, not by smell. When it comes to food, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, we learned that spoiled food it's inappropriate. It's one shouldn't eat it. It's considered despicable to eat spoiled food. And I think there we said to use smell. Generally, that's a pretty good indication of whether food is good or isn't good. But when it comes to wine, even if it smells like it's already turned into vinegar, as long as it still tastes like wine, that's fine. But if it has turned vinegary, meaning in taste as well, to the extent that some people refrain from drinking it because of its sour taste, then the bracha is in question. And although you can't say the bracha shehakol, so it loses its honorary status of wine, and now it would just get the regular bracha that you say on other drinks called shehakol, there's still a question about the after bracha. Therefore, don't drink it. Although I don't know why somebody would want to drink wine that has already turned into vinegar. Parenthetically, it's happened before. I've seen it happen in, I won't say where, but either way, it's happened where somebody made kiddush on a cup of grape juice, and as they began to drink it, they couldn't drink it because it was spoiled. If that happens, then firstly, take it back to the store. But secondly, it actually means that your kiddush was ineffective. Kiddush has to be done on something honorable. So although you thought you had a cup of wine, if when you tasted it tastes like vinegar, then you haven't honored the Shabbos at all. So you would actually need to make kiddush once again. Go back to the beginning. If it doesn't taste good, then it's halachically not considered wine, is not honorable, and will actually not qualify for kiddush. So stay away from that, which is why last year we had to do a whole new batch. Moving on to number 2. So concerning grape seeds from which wine was extracted only by means of trampling. It's interesting because when you leave the seeds, any seeds that go into the actually I'm confusing it. If any of the pieces that hold the clusters together, if you leave that inside, it makes it very bitter. I think the seeds also could make it a little, actually not, because most wine grapes do have seeds and they can still be very sweet. But here we're talking about it where the grape juice or the wine was squeezed out of the seeds themselves. So you didn't put it in a heavy duty wine press, but you did trample over the seeds. So if water was poured upon them, even if they recovered no more water than they poured on them, or even if they recovered less, nevertheless, if the taste of what is of wine, then the bracha is Borer Pri Hagafen. So even if it seems like it's mostly water over here, meaning that the liquid that came out of the seeds didn't increase the total volume of liquid, still you would say, if it tastes like wine, you would still be able to say Borer Pri Hagafen. But I guess we'll move along. This is probably not very likely. Although it could be that you could buy wine seeds or grape seed wine. So if you see that, then you'll know the Shulchan Aruch speaks about that too. But if the seeds were pressed into a heavy-duty wine press and then the water was poured on them, or they poured water over the residue in the vat from which all the seeds were removed, at that point it would be considered water. So if it's what originally seeps out, that's one thing. But if it's already through a heavy press, it already loses its status of wine. I didn't get a chance to look into the halacha in detail. So let's move on to the next halacha. If wine was diluted with water, and the wine is only 1/6 of the mixture, meaning 5 parts water and 1 part wine, the wine is definitely nullified, and it is at that point considered water. So if you try to save on the cost of wine, and you think that you'll take 1 bottle and you'll dilute it, and then you'll have not just enough to make kiddush on this week, but for the next 6 weeks. So once it's 1/6, then that's not wine. That's just grape-flavored water. But if it has more wine than 1/6, and it is the custom of people of that area to dilute it to that degree and drink it as wine, then the bracha would retain Borer Pri Hagafen, would remain, and Al Hagafen afterwards. However, if the people of that area do not drink it as wine, then the individual's opinion does not count, and the bracha is shehakol. So if you're just adding a little bit of water, then that wouldn't be a problem. But if you've added enough water where it would not be drinking this way, then it no longer is considered wine. At that point, it is considered water. It's interesting in the Gemara, it speaks about how the wine would be very strong and they would actually dilute it. So that's how they would drink it. They would drink it diluted. So much so that the Gemara actually says that you shouldn't drink. It's not honorable to make Kiddush on undiluted wine because it's not drinkable. It only reaches its perfection when you add a bit of water. But today, I don't believe that's the case. Today, I believe wine is, no water's been added. It's pure juice from the grape. Now, here's a very interesting halacha, which many people don't know, even those that have been around the block for a while. And that is that just as when you say the bracha on bread, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, that covers all foods, all meal foods, so too when you make a bracha on a cup of wine, borei peri hagafen, that covers all other drinks. And so you won't need to make a bracha on almost any other drink once you've made a borei peri hagafen on the wine, which is quite interesting. So what that means, practically speaking, is if you're at shul, for example, and there's a kiddush or a bracha, as they call it in South Africa, and the kiddush has been made, so as long as you haven't drinking from that wine, which would probably be the case in COVID times, then if you're going to have a cup of water, you will make a bracha on that cup of water. But if you, at the beginning of the bracha, made a borei peri hagafen on that cup of wine or on a little bit of wine or grape juice, although the bracha on water is a different bracha, the bracha on water is shakol diyam bidvaro. Nonetheless, wine is considered a king drink in that whenever you make a bracha on wine, that bracha will include any other drink you would drink afterwards. So if you said a borei peri hagafen, then even if you didn't have bread, you still would not make a bracha on any other drinks. You would make a bracha on other foods, but you wouldn't make a bracha on any other drinks. So that's quite an interesting one. This is only if the beverages were before you at the time that you made the bracha over the wine, or at least you had in mind to drink them. But if they were not in front of you, and it wasn't your intention to drink them, then there's an unresolved debate amongst the halachic commentaries if the other drink would require its own bracha or not. So actually, maybe you would just avoid drinking, because on the one hand, you don't want to drink without making a bracha. On the other hand, you don't want to say a bracha that's unnecessary, because that's actually saying God's name in vain. So the solution is that whenever you do make a bracha on wine, have in mind that you'll probably have a drink afterwards as well, and that way you will be covered. Thank you so much for joining us with the special drink of wine. I should have told you to bring some kosher wine with you to the shir, so this could be an all-round experience. But please God, tomorrow we will continue about dining and wining, same time, same place.